Congratulations, True Crime Addicts. We've survived another week. It is Friday, March 21st, 2025. This week, police released the 911 calls from the home where 4 University of Idaho students were murdered. Trump opens the secret files on JFK. And the latest updates on the disappearance of Maura Murray. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Yes, super excited. We are all pumped to have James Renner.
James Renner on.
That James Renner has zeroed in on.
James Renner once again drops a bombshell.
Investigative journalist, reporter James Renner, who's been on the podcast, long-time friend of mine.
And we're back with more True Crime This Week with me, your host, James Renner. Oh, almost missed the James Renner bell. There we go. Hey, I'm just recovering from the flu. It finally caught up with me, but I feel like 95% better. I wanted to jump on here. It's been a crazy week in true crime. I want to bring you the news you might not have heard in true crime over the last week, so we're going to get to that in a second. But first, my new book, Scout Camp, is out as an audiobook, finally. Came out this week. It's on Audible. Check it out. True crime fans love the audiobooks because I think we're so used to these podcasts, we just want to listen to it. So there it is. Scout Camp as an audiobook on Audible. Check it out. Tell me what you think. And as always, I want to thank my buddy Walter for manning the camera. Walter's just back from the local Tesla dealership. Walter, why do you smell like gasoline? We'll talk about that later. Let's get to the top stories. The trial of Bryan Kohberger for the murders of 4 University of Idaho students is set to begin August 11th, and prosecutors and police are beginning to release evidence they hope to use to convict him. This week, they released audio from a 911 call the morning of the murders, as well as Kohberger's Amazon shopping list. A quick refresher on this case. In the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, a masked intruder entered a rental home that was shared by several University of Idaho students. Sometime around 4 a.m., this intruder used a K-bar style military knife, that's the kind of knife that Marines carry, to murder Madison Mogul, Zana Kernodle, Kaylee Goncalves, and Ethan Chapin. 2 other young women who lived in the house were unharmed. One of those women opened her door after hearing some kind of commotion and saw a man walking toward her wearing black clothing and a mask. He walked past her and exited through a sliding glass door. Just before noon the next day, roommates discovered the body of one of the deceased and called 911. During the investigation, police obtained DNA from a tan leather knife sheath found on Mogan's bed. That DNA led them to Bryan Kohberger, a doctoral student who was studying criminology nearby. Last Friday, that audio from the 911 call was released to the public. On the tape, the voice of a young woman can be heard saying, quote, "Something happened in our house," end quote. She breaks down crying and then hands the phone to another woman, according to CBS News. That person then says, quote, "One of the roommates who's passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she's not waking up. Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night," end quote. The phone is passed around again, and then a male voice comes on and tells the dispatcher that the woman they found was not breathing. At that point, the police arrive, and the call ends. And then yesterday, prosecutors filed a motion asking a judge to allow them to present Kohberger's Amazon shopping activity at trial. What could possibly be on there? Well, the evidence will show that Kohberger bought a K-bar knife and sheath online in the months leading up to the killings. If convicted in August, Kohberger could face the death penalty. And I think there's a pretty good chance this guy's getting convicted. Are you guys, do you guys watch Ghost Adventures on the Travel Channel? It's one of those ghost hunting shows where a bunch of guys explore haunted houses and abandoned buildings and, jump at shadows and things. But it's strangely addicting. It's one of those, end of the night, put it on, kind of relax, half watch it, chill kind of shows. I personally recommend the episode on the Villisca Axe murder house. It's perfect. What does all this have to do with true crime, you may ask? Well, the wife of one of those ghost hunters was recently arrested for putting out a hit on her husband. Here's the story. Las Vegas police arrested Victoria Goodwin on March 6th, according to Fox News. She's married to Aaron Goodwin, who stars on the show. She's charged with soliciting to commit murder and conspiring to commit murder. The details of her scheme are bonkers. According to police, Victoria had started a pen-pal relationship with convicted murderer Grant Amato, who is in prison for killing his mom, dad, and brother. Victoria began to confide in Amato that she was having problems in her marriage. You know, a marriage counselor would have been easier, not that much more expensive. But you go to a convicted murderer and I don't understand. She and Amato began exchanging texts as they allegedly began to plan Aaron's murder. In one text, Victoria writes, quote, "Am I a bad person because I chose to end his existence and not get a divorce?" End quote. Yes, Victoria, yes, that makes you a bad person. Victoria used the Find My app to track her husband's movements and then relayed that information to Amato, who was communicating with a potential hitman on the outside. Quote, "He's asleep right now in the hotel room," Amato wrote in one text. "I need to know what's going on. Can I get an update? Was it done?" End quote. The plan came to light only when corrections officers at Amato's prison confiscated his phone and reviewed his texts. Aaron has already filed for divorce. I guess the lesson here is that ghosts are never quite as scary as other human beings. Perhaps the greatest true crime story of the 20th century was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It is also the subject of countless conspiracy theories. Was Oswald the lone gunman? Was Kennedy actually killed by the CIA or Castro or the driver? This week, in between destroying the Department of Education and whitewashing American history, President Trump released tens of thousands of records from the investigation into JFK's assassination, according to the Washington Post. Now, there's no smoking gun here in these documents, no pun intended, but the details are interesting. It shows that the CIA was keeping tabs on Oswald when he visited the Cuban consulate and the Soviet embassy in Mexico City in the weeks leading up to the assassination. One report talks about how the KGB were also aware of Oswald, but couldn't really control him. The Russian spy agency watched Oswald closely during his visits to the USSR. Interestingly, the report notes that Oswald was a very poor shot. Most of the revelations have little to do with the assassination itself and more to do with the inner workings of the CIA. One report reveals that one of Castro's good friends was actually a CIA asset. Like much of Trump's actions, though, this release appears to have been rushed and managed by inept officials because they forgot to redact some Social Security numbers of the subjects in the documents, including the Social Security number of Joseph DeGenova, a lawyer who worked on Trump's 2020 campaign, who was, let's say, displeased to find his personal information had been given to nutty conspiracy theorists. Unfortunately, after waiting all these years, there is no definitive answer in these files, and Oswald appears to have been a lone gunman after all. Those are the top stories. I'll be back in 2 and 2 after this break with updates on the Maura Murray case, and we got to get into the Karen Reed story a little bit too, and then the weirdest news stories you've ever heard. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Please hang up and try again.
And we're back with more True Crime This Week, brought to you by the Ford Edsel. It acts the way it looks, but it doesn't cost that much. Last week, I brought to you an exclusive in the disappearance of Maura Murray, and I want to update that a little bit. Maura Murray, as you know, was a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2004 when she drove into the White Mountains of New Hampshire and disappeared after crashing her car into a snowbank. The news I learned last week was that a fingerprint found inside Maura Murray's car was matched to the fingerprint of former West Point cadet Stephen Baldwin. Stephen was sentenced to 15 years in prison in Ohio last week for needlessly killing 18 dogs under his care, as well as bribery and impersonating a peace officer. I spoke to Stephen prior to his sentencing, and he explained to me that he and Maura were in a relationship together at West Point prior to her meeting Bill Rausch. He also said that he represented Maura when she went in front of a judicial review board after being found passed out on the lawn at West Point after a night of drinking. Stephen claims his fingerprints were found on a CD or CD case in her car and explained that they would often swap CDs when they were seeing each other. When the New Hampshire State Police contacted authorities in Ohio in 2020, they said that Stephen was their number one suspect, but it's unclear if they still believe him to be so. However, Stephen apparently is still of interest to the investigation because he was interviewed by the FBI less than a year ago. One bit of new information since my last update. I have learned that Stephen changed his name just 8 months after Maura disappeared. Before that, he was known as Stephen Finkelstein. Strange timing, to be sure. Remember this guy Michael Proctor, the lead investigator in the death of John O'Keefe? That detective who called Karen Reed a whack job and texted a friend, quote, "Hopefully she kills herself," end quote. Yeah, he's finally been fired. Colonel Jeffrey Noble announced the decision on Wednesday, according to CBS News. A trial board found Proctor guilty of unsatisfactory performance and violating policy of alcoholic beverages. That charge stems from an incident the defense lawyers for Karen Reed uncovered. Proctor had gone out drinking with police officer Kevin Albert, who was the brother of Brian Albert, who owned that property where John O'Keefe's body was found. And Kevin texted Proctor that he had left his badge and gun in Proctor's car. Karen Reed is scheduled to go on trial again in a couple weeks, even though the jury in her first trial believed her to be not guilty on at least 2 of those charges. Proctor released a statement defending his actions, but you know what? I'm not going to read it because fuck that guy, right? And now a strange and tragic story from Connecticut. 56-year-old Kimberly Sullivan has been arrested for keeping her stepson locked up in her house for 20 years. The identity of her stepson, who is now 32 years old, is not being released, but he has not been allowed to leave the house for 2 decades and was only rescued after he set fire to his bedroom in an attempt to escape. Sullivan is charged with kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and cruelty, according to the Boston Globe. When interviewed by police, the stepson said he had been locked inside the house since he was 11 years old. Sullivan told police that the man's door was never locked, but police discovered the room had a slide lock attached to the outside. While captive, the man was allowed 2 cups of water and 2 sandwiches a day, and his room was just 8 feet by 9. He weighed just 68 pounds when he was rescued. He told police that his imprisonment became more intense after his biological father passed away. He was then gifted his father's jacket, and inside that jacket pocket was the lighter that the man used to set fire to the house. Over the years, he used a radio to keep updated on current events and NASCAR, and to keep track of time, and he educated himself with books and encyclopedias. Hopefully, Sullivan will be sentenced to the time her stepson was spent captive in her house, plus at least a day for good measure. Police in Maryland solved a 46-year-old cold case murder this week, according to ABC News. The body of 31-year-old Catherine Donahue was found in a parking lot in Glenarden on March 3, 1979. She had been beaten, raped, and murdered, but detectives were unable to come up with any viable suspects back then. But there was DNA on her body, and thanks to advancements in genetic genealogy, they were finally able to track that DNA to family members of Roger Zotis Brown, an 82-year-old man living in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Police said he was solemn and cold when he was arrested. He has been charged with first-degree murder and awaits trial. Just a reminder to anyone out there who's committed murder decades ago, this genetic genealogy stuff is pretty amazing. It might be worth your time to simply get a lawyer and turn yourself in. Let's jump over to weird news, shall we? A thief named Michael Jones was convicted on Tuesday for stealing a toilet from Blenheim Palace, the mansion where Winston Churchill was born. But this was not just any toilet. The poop throne was made entirely of 18-karat gold and valued at $6 million. Prior to the theft, Jones had done a little reconnaissance at the mansion and actually used the gold toilet to relieve himself, an experience he called, quote, splendid. On September 14, 2019, he returned with 2 other men and used crowbars and sledgehammers to pry it from its base, causing a flood that damaged the house. It turns out the toilet was originally created as a work of art by Italian artist Maurizio Catalan. I'm sorry for butchering that name. Let's try it again. Maurizio Catalan. How's that? That's blatantly racist. Who titled it America. It was once on display at the Guggenheim, and the museum, this is true. This part's true. It was on display at the Guggenheim, and President Trump came into the museum and said, hey, can I borrow a Van Gogh? And they said, why don't you take this toilet instead? It just didn't work out. That's true. Upon his sentencing, Jones whispered, well, shit. Over to pop culture. There's a new true crime documentary on Netflix this week called Chaos, the Manson Murders, a deep dive into the cult that murdered actress Sharon Tate and 4 others at her home in 1969. Interesting fact, Manson himself never murdered anybody, but he was able to use his charm and psychopathy to convince his followers to murder for him. The documentary explores the cult's links to CIA experiments and mind control. It's getting decent reviews, so check it out. The true crime book of the week is by a friend of the show, Amanda Knox. She's got a new book out called Free, My Search for Meaning. Now, I met Amanda a couple years ago. She was trying to put together a documentary or a podcast, like 6-episode podcast series on Maura Murray. And I did like 10 hours of interviews with Amanda. She's super smart, super smart, and a really good journalist, like old school journalist, doesn't like fall for any of your tomfoolery. She had interviewed Julie Murray too. In fact, there was an episode where Julie and I were on together and discussing the case. That fell apart, though, around the time that Julie decided to make her own podcast, but I always wonder what would have happened with that. Anyways, Amanda Knox is great. She's got a new book out called Free. Here's the write-up. Amanda Knox spent nearly 4 years in prison and 8 years on trial for a murder she didn't commit, and became a notorious tabloid story in the process. Though she was exonerated, it's taken more than a decade for her to reclaim her identity and truly feel free. Free recounts how Knox survived prison, the mistakes she made, the misadventures she had reintegrating into society, and culminates in the untold story of her return to Italy and the extraordinary relationship she's built with the man who sent her to prison. It is the gripping saga of what happens when you become the definition of notorious, but have quietly returned to the matters of a normal life, seeking a life partner, finding a job, or even just going out in public. In harrowing and sometimes hilarious detail, Amanda tells her story of personal growth and hard-fought wisdom, recasting her public reckoning as a private reflection on the search for meaning and purpose that will speak to everyone persevering through hardship. That'll be a powerful book. Check it out. Nice job, Amanda. And that's the show for this week. And tune in next week. Same time, same bat channel, Friday mornings. Every week I bring you the true crime news you might have missed. And in the meantime, in the words of the incomparable Murray Saul, the godfather of Cleveland radio, we gotta. Get down, damn it. True Crime This Week is a Fearful Symmetry production. Photo and artwork are licensed through Shutterstock. If you like the cut of my jib, I have another podcast you might enjoy called The Philosophy of Crime, in which I attempt to solve the big questions behind our true crime obsession,
by looking to philosophy for answers. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Sit, Brownie, sit. Good dog.